Get that dog out of here before he tears the place apart." The harsh words echoed through the dimly lit aisles of the Willowbrook Public Library as the head librarian, Mrs. Hargrove, glared at the German Shepherd tugging furiously at its leash. Officer Daniel Mercer tightened his grip on the canine, whose nose pressed hard against the base of the ancient stone wall tucked behind the genealogy section. The dog wasn't barking, but the low guttural whine rising from its chest carried an urgency that silenced even the children reading nearby. "Rex doesn't act like this without reason," Daniel shot back, his voice sharp. "If he's picked up a scent, we're not moving until we know what it is." Mrs. Hargrove bristled, her thin frame stiffening against the weight of his words. She had been the guardian of this library for 40 years, and every inch of it was sacred to her. Dusty archives, fragile manuscripts, and forgotten relics filled the space, and the thought of a police dog scratching at centuries-old walls unsettled her deeply. Yet, even she couldn't ignore the strange intensity in Rex's behavior. His claws scraped across the stone, his body shivering with a mixture of excitement and agitation, as if something buried deep within was calling to him in the far corner. Eleanor Finch, a retired schoolteacher and longtime resident of Willowbrook, watched the scene unfold with a trembling hand on her cane. "That wall," she whispered, her eyes clouding with a memory she had never spoken aloud. "Something about that wall has never felt right." Daniel glanced at her. "What do you mean?" Eleanor hesitated, her throat tightening as she wrestled with decades of silence. "When I was a girl, before the new wing was built, my father told me that part of the library was older than the town itself. He said there were rooms no one should ever open, rooms sealed for reasons best left forgotten." Her words seemed to hang in the air like a warning, drawing the attention of the few patrons who hadn't already fled the commotion. Rex suddenly let out a sharp bark, startling everyone. His nose pressed harder against a section of stone just below a faded brass plaque. Daniel crouched low, brushing away the dust with his palm. Beneath the grime, faint lines became visible, not random cracks but deliberate carving symbols etched into the stone. He had no idea what they meant, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Mrs. Hargrove's face paled. "You shouldn't be touching that. Those markings are older than this library. They don't belong to any catalog, and no record explains why they're there. Leave it be." Her voice wavered, betraying her fear. But Daniel wasn't listening. Something about the symbols spoke to him, tugging at a primal instinct to uncover what lay beyond. He glanced back at Eleanor, whose eyes were glistening with tears. "If your father knew something, then this isn't just about a wall. What's behind it?" Her lips trembled as she answered, "A truth the town buried long before you were born." The silence that followed was broken only by Rex's nails scratching insistently. Daniel stood, his resolve hardening. "We're not leaving. If there's something behind this wall, we have to know." In that moment, the library ceased to feel like a place of quiet learning. The shelves seemed taller, the shadows darker, and the smell of aged paper heavier in the air. Fear mingled with anticipation as everyone present felt the weight of history pressing down on them. Mrs. Hargrove clasped her trembling hands, torn between her duty to protect the library and the gnawing dread of secrets being unearthed. Eleanor whispered, almost to herself, "Secrets don't stay buried forever. They wait, and when they rise, they demand to be seen." Daniel placed a steady hand on Rex's head, looking into the dog's intense eyes. Whatever was hidden behind that wall wasn't just stone and mortar. It was something that had clawed its way through time, waiting for this moment. And now, with half the town unknowingly gathered in the building, the first crack in its silence was about to break. The library seemed to hold its breath as Daniel pressed his fingers against the carvings, wondering if he was about to awaken a piece of history or a nightmare. The dog whined louder, his claws striking the same spot again and again, until a faint hollow echo whispered back from within the wall. It was not solid stone. Something lay beyond. And in that fragile pause between the sound of claw against rock and the stunned gasps of those watching, a sense of inevitability settled over the room. Whatever was hidden there had chosen its moment to return. Daniel's knuckles were white as he pressed against the wall, tracing the carvings with his fingertips. Rex trembled beside him, pacing in tight circles before returning to paw furiously at the same spot. The hollow sound was undeniable now, a dull thud echoing beneath the stone that should have been solid. Murmurs rippled through the crowd that had gathered, some patrons edging closer, others drifting toward the door as if sensing danger. Mrs. Hargrove clutched her cardigan tight to her chest, her lips pressed thin, while Eleanor's eyes stayed fixed on the wall as if reliving a memory she wished she had buried with her youth. "Stop this before it goes too far," Mrs. Hargrove said in a strained voice, her control faltering. "This library isn't a crime scene. It's a place for knowledge, for children, for peace. If you break that wall, you'll unleash something we are not prepared to face." Daniel turned sharply, his expression stern. "Prepared or not, it's already stirring. You can feel it, can't you?" The air's changed. His words weren't for argument. They were the truth everyone felt but feared to say aloud. The room felt heavier, the fluorescent lights flickering once as though the building itself shivered. Eleanor's cane tapped against the polished floor as she shuffled closer, her voice trembling. I remember standing near that wall as a girl, watching the men who came at night with shovels and torches. They swore us children to silence. They said the town could only survive if we forgot what lay beneath. My father said the truth is not always meant to be known, but he was wrong, wasn't he? Secrets rot the soul of a town. A deep silence followed her confession, broken only by Rex's steady whine. Daniel inhaled slowly, steadying himself against the unease creeping into his bones. With a decisive motion he pulled a small crowbar from his kit. The metallic scrape of it against stone made every head in the room turn. Patrons exchanged uneasy glances, their fear swelling into curiosity they couldn't resist. The first strike sent a shock through the wall. Dust rained down in a fine curtain, coating the air with the smell of damp earth and age. Rex barked sharply, his body jerking as if the sound of stone breaking answered something inside him. Daniel struck again, harder this time, and a jagged crack formed across the carvings. The library seemed to groan, the shelves creaking as though the structure itself disapproved. "Stop, please," Mrs. Hargrove begged, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't understand. We're not ready for this. There are things best left untouched." But Daniel ignored her, his mind locked on the mission, though his heart pounded with doubt. On the third strike, the stone gave way. A fragment fell inward, vanishing into blackness. The hollow behind the wall exhaled a gust of cold air that swept through the room, carrying with it the smell of mold and something metallic sharp, almost coppery. People gasped, covering their noses, stepping back instinctively. Eleanor let out a soft cry, her hand trembling as it hovered near her mouth. "It's the same smell from that night," she whispered. "Blood. I never forgot it." Daniel steadied the beam of his flashlight into the breach, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. The edges of the opening were framed with old bricks, but they were warped and blackened as if scorched by fire long ago. The beam caught something on the floor, glinting faintly. He crouched lower, squinting, until the image sharpened a rusted chain, thick and heavy, coiled like a discarded serpent. The crowd stirred with nervous whispers. Some muttered about tunnels from the old days, others about rituals and sins buried in the town's past. Rex lunged forward, his nose pressing into the opening, tail rigid, ears pinned back. He barked once, a sound raw and urgent, as if commanding Daniel to go further. Mrs. Hargrove shook her head violently. "If you step inside, there will be no turning back. This place was sealed for a reason, officer. That reason is stronger than your curiosity." But Eleanor stepped closer to Daniel, her voice rising with unexpected strength. "No, let him go. Let him see. Our fathers buried their mistakes, their shame, their sins, and made us carry the silence. That silence has poisoned this town for generations. It's time we faced it." The argument pulled the crowd into two halves, those who wanted the wall sealed again, and those whose hunger for truth outweighed their fear. The atmosphere grew tense, almost combustible, as if the very air carried static. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and dimmed again, plunging the library into a surreal twilight. Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes on the opening. "I'll go down there," he said quietly, "but not alone." He looked at Rex, the dog's body taut with purpose. "He's already chosen. Whatever's waiting, we'll face it together." Eleanor reached out and touched his sleeve, her voice breaking. "If you find what I think you will, promise me you won't let the town deny it again. Promise me you won't let them bury it." Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He could feel the weight of history pressing on his shoulders, the eyes of the town watching, the air thick with the presence of something long concealed. With one last glance at the frightened faces behind him, he tightened his grip on the flashlight and pushed himself through the narrow opening, Rex slipping. In beside him, the darkness swallowed them whole, and the murmurs of the crowd faded to silence. All that remained was the sound of Daniel's boots scraping against the damp floor, Rex's nails clicking beside him, and the growing certainty that whatever lay ahead was not simply forgotten, it had been waiting. The pounding of Rex's claws grew sharper, and each strike seemed to echo through the library like a drumbeat of warning. The air had shifted, no longer just heavy with dust and old paper, but charged with something that made skin prickle and hearts tighten. Daniel's jaw clenched as he pressed his ear against the wall, hearing that hollow resonance again, as though, behind the stone, there was a chamber waiting, alive with the weight of years. Mrs. Hargrove muttered under her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the circulation desk. Her voice, though low, carried a tremor that reached everyone in the room. "If you break through, you'll unleash what was meant to be forgotten. I've guarded this place my whole life for a reason." Daniel turned his eyes to her, steady but defiant. "Guarding history doesn't mean burying it forever. If it's dangerous, then people deserve to know. If it's important, then it belongs to the town, not sealed behind stone." Rex whined louder, his body pressed low to the floor, as though trying to crawl into the very foundation itself. Eleanor's cane tapped faintly as she moved closer, her fragile frame drawn by something stronger than fear. She leaned heavily on the cane, her breath shaky, but her eyes carried the same curiosity Daniel felt. "My father said the wall was built after the war," she whispered, the words trembling in the silence. "Not to protect books, but to protect People he called it the town's shadow. The phrase sent a ripple through those listening. A shadow, a secret carried across generations, hidden where no one thought to look. Mrs. Hargrove's lips quivered as if to argue, but the weight of Eleanor's words silenced her. Daniel pulled a small flashlight from his belt and shone it across the carvings. The light revealed not random etchings, but shapes resembling eyes, dozens of them, layered one upon another, staring back with haunting precision. The crowd drew closer without meaning to, drawn by the mystery, even as unease thickened around them. Suddenly Rex's paw struck hard against a loose stone. A small piece broke away, tumbling to the ground, and from the crack seeped a faint breath of air, colder than the rest of the library. The gasp from the onlookers was immediate, as though the building itself had just exhaled after centuries of holding in its secrets. Daniel's pulse quickened. He pushed his fingers into the crack and felt space open, waiting. Behind him a young boy clutched his mother's arm and whispered, "It's a tomb," though no one had told him to think so. The innocence of his fear only deepened the dread. Mrs. Hargrove's composure finally cracked. She stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes as her voice rose, harsher than before. "Stop this at once. Do you think this town hasn't suffered enough? Do you think walls are built for no reason? Some truths aren't meant to be opened." Her words shook with both authority and desperation, as though she knew more than she had ever admitted. The crowd stared, half in anger, half in confusion, sensing that she had long been a guardian not just of books but of something far darker. Daniel held her gaze. "Secrets can rot a town from the inside, Mrs. Hargrove. Maybe this is why people here live with ghosts they can't name. Maybe it's time they were faced." His voice cut like steel, but even as he spoke, doubt curled in his gut. What if she was right? What if this wall wasn't meant to be broken? Yet Rex's persistence felt like destiny itself. The dog's body trembled, not with fear but with determination, as if he were the chosen instrument to uncover what humans had tried to erase. Then came the sound that stopped every breath. From behind the wall, faint but undeniable, a noise stirred a scraping, like something shifting in the darkness beyond stone. It was not imagination, not the groan of an old building, but movement, real, alive, and waiting. Children whimpered, adults stepped back instinctively, colliding with chairs and shelves. Eleanor's cane slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor, but she did not bend to pick it up. Her eyes remained fixed on the wall as tears streaked her cheeks. "I told you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They never left. They were sealed in." The library became a cage of silence and pounding hearts. Daniel's throat tightened, but he forced his voice out, low and steady. "Everyone stay back." He drew his hand slowly away from the crack, though the cold air still brushed against his skin. Rex barked sharply, a single command to act, but no one moved. The scraping from behind grew louder, closer, as if whatever had been trapped all these years sensed the weakness in its prison. Mrs. Hargrove sank into a chair, her face buried in her trembling hands, whispering something too soft to hear. For the first time, Daniel felt a weight in his chest heavier than duty. This wasn't just discovery, it was awakening. And if Eleanor was right, if the town's shadow truly lived behind that wall, then by tearing it open, he wasn't just exposing history, he was releasing it. The dog pressed his body flat against the stone, nails scratching, tail rigid with urgency, but Daniel hesitated, because in that moment, for the first time, he wasn't sure if uncovering the truth would save the town or destroy it. The wall shuddered with a sound that did not belong in the hushed silence of the library. Dust drifted down in pale streams, coating the shelves like forgotten ash. Rex's claws scraped once more, and then, with a groan of ancient stone surrendering, a thin crack spread across the carvings. The crowd gasped, some stumbling backward, others pressing closer despite themselves. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hand firm on the dog's collar, as though steadying both Rex and himself. He had seen men break down in interrogation rooms, had heard lies unravel under pressure, but nothing in his years as an officer compared to the unsettling sensation of a library wall breathing against his palm. Eleanor clutched her cane so tightly, her knuckles whitened. "It's happening," she whispered, her eyes filling with dread and awe. Her voice cracked as if carrying the weight of an old promise she had once made to herself never to speak of this. Mrs. Hargrove, normally so rigid and unyielding, stepped forward with trembling hands stretched outward, not to stop the officer, but to steady herself. "For decades I've walked these halls," she said faintly, "and always I felt that wall was more than stone. Something inside me knew, but I refused to look closer." Her confession bled into the stillness, carried by the dust-filled air. Crack widened with a brittle snap, and the scent that escaped was unlike anything the townspeople had ever known. It was not rot, nor the smell of decay, but something dry and ancient, like parchment soaked in grief. Rex whimpered now, torn between his instinct to flee and his duty to stay. His body quivered against Daniel's side, and Daniel lowered himself, until his lips were near the dog's ear. "We'll face it together," he murmured, a promise that steadied them both. The crowd edged closer despite their fear, their curiosity heavier than caution. A boy no older than 10, clutching his mother's Sleeve asked in a trembling voice. Is it a monster? The innocence of the question struck Daniel sharply, reminding him that once revealed, there would be no turning back. Monsters came in many forms, he thought. Sometimes claws and teeth, sometimes secrets and silence. With one final shove, a portion of the wall gave way, collapsing inward with a muted crash. The dust clouded the room, sending everyone into coughs and cries, but when it cleared, the space revealed itself, a narrow chamber, no larger than a cellar, carved with the same strange symbols that lined the wall. Inside, illuminated by the weak light that filtered through the library, lay a wooden chest, blackened by age, its surface covered in symbols that pulsed faintly as though they breathed. A hush fell heavier than before. Eleanor swayed, her cane clattering against the floor as she whispered, I told my father I would never tell, never let anyone touch it. Her voice broke, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I failed him. I failed them all. Her words made no sense to the others, but the raw ache in her tone was unmistakable. Daniel's hand reached for the chest, but Mrs. Hargrove caught his wrist, her frail fingers surprisingly strong. Think carefully, she said, her eyes glistening. If you open this, the town will never be the same. Some truths ruin more than lies ever could. Her warning was not laced with authority this time, but with genuine fear. The librarian, who had always fought for order, now fought for the fragile safety of not knowing. The dog barked once, sharp and piercing as though urging them on. Daniel's chest tightened, the choice pressed against him. Uncover what had been buried for generations, or seal it again and live forever with the haunting weight of questions. He looked around at the faces: fear, hope, anger, confusion, all woven into a single moment that demanded resolution. He felt the pulse of the chest beneath his fingertips even before he touched it, a rhythm that matched the beating of his own heart. The room's silence fractured when the boy's voice rang. Again, softer this time. Please, mister, we need to know. The plea struck Daniel with unexpected force. The child's words echoed what the entire town felt but dared not say. They had all lived in the shadow of this library, all felt the unease beneath its walls, and now, with the truth so close, none could turn away. Daniel inhaled slowly, his lungs heavy with dust and history. His fingers slid across the chest's surface, and the symbols seemed to warm beneath his touch. Eleanor sobbed openly now, shaking her head but saying nothing more. The lid creaked as his hand pressed against it, the sound louder than thunder in the quiet chamber. For an instant, he hesitated, the enormity of what he was about to do anchoring him in place, and then, with a steady push, the lid began to rise. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, the weight of centuries collapsing into this single heartbeat. What lay inside had waited long enough, and the town of Willowbrook was about to learn whether it had been protected or deceived all these years. The chest opened with a reluctant sigh, its hinges straining as if resisting the touch of light after centuries of silence. Inside lay not gold, nor relics of power, but a carefully folded bundle of letters bound in brittle ribbon, their edges browned with time. A hush fell so complete that even the ticking of the old library clock seemed to vanish. Daniel lifted the first letter with care, his gloved fingers trembling. The ink was faded but legible, a confession written in a hand both steady and sorrowful. They were the voices of the town's founders, admitting to choices made in secrecy, lives displaced, promises broken, and a truth buried to preserve the illusion of harmony. Alona's tears flowed freely as she recognized the names signed at the bottom. They swore to build this town on hope, she whispered, her voice breaking, but it was built on silence and shame. The weight of her words settled over the room, heavier than any artifact could have been. For decades, the unease beneath that wall had not been the echo of superstition, but the echo of guilt woven into the town's very foundation. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some faces reflected anger, others sorrow, but none indifference. Even Mrs. Hargrove, whose duty had always been to guard the library, bowed her head. It seems this place was never just a home for books, she murmured. It was a vault for sins no one dared face. Her voice carried no accusation, only the weary resignation of truth finally laid bare. Daniel looked around at the gathered townspeople, their eyes wide and wet with the reflection of both loss and revelation. This is not the end of us, he said quietly. This is the beginning of honesty. His words were simple, but they struck deep, offering not closure but a path forward. Rex lay at his feet now. Calm at last, as if his purpose had been fulfilled. As the library doors opened to the fading light of evening, the people of Willowbrook stepped out, carrying not treasure, but a truth that bound them together in both sorrow and renewal. The wall had been broken, but what it revealed was not a curse. It was a chance to remember, to acknowledge, and perhaps to heal. In the stillness that followed, the last dust settled across the empty shelves, and for the first time in generations, the library seemed lighter. Its silence no longer heavy with secrets but alive with the weight of truth finally spoken.